Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of Reading Zoos in the Age of the Anthropocene. We have in this first session 2 speakers, Concha and Soojin, and I'm going to turn things over to Concha, who I think is going to start us off.
Yeah, well, thank you, Carrie. First of all, I'm going to readjust my position a bit. I should have done this digitally, but then I wasn't sure about how to do that. So I'm going to, well, maybe you recognize that illustration. Those are the phytodecta. So I share with the materials, so they are there. They are here also. And I wanted to, to do this with them in the background, as sort of family portraits in a way. So in the materials that I provided for the reader, there were these phytodecta prints, phytodecta variably prints, and also an article by my great-grandfather. And this is the thing about the materials I provided, that these are related to my family and my great-grandfather, Antonio de Zulueta. And the thing about all these is I don't really know, I haven't this difficulty of how to deal with these things being part of a family history and having known about it all my life. And so this is the reason why I wanted to bring this here. And well, this is not going to be like the usual presentation I deliver, but if it had a title, it would be, I guess, Insects as Family. Because you see here that in a way are displayed maybe like family portraits. And family also, like Antonio de Zulueta, my great-grandfather, she was this biologist and considered a pioneer of genetics in Spain. So I provided one of his articles on this phytodecta and how the color patterns are inherited through the Y chromosome. And as well as a little translation that I did. And so when Carrie issued the call for papers, and well, thank you, Carrie, for organizing all this. So when Carrie issued the call for papers, I instantly began to think about my great-grandfather. First of all, because he was working at the Museo de Ciencias Naturales in Madrid, the Museum of Natural Science here in Madrid, almost all his life. And all other of the words of the exhibition was, of this workshop was exhibition. And there's going to be a forthcoming exhibition on my great-grandfather for the first time at the Museum de Ciencias Naturales here in Madrid. And I'm not curating it, but I'm collaborating in it, like trying to provide materials and things that I find about my great-grandfather. But I also feel that, I don't know if this, I'm not sure if this works in English, the curation bit as healing, but it does work like that in Spanish. I mean, curation is sometimes translated, or curator is sometimes translated as curador, although the usual word tends to be comisario. But curador would have this also these connotations of healing, and I think a little bit like that about this exhibition, because, as you saw in other materials I provided, which is the short text on called Genetics in Madrid, which was published in the journal, the scientific journal Nature. My great-grandfather was in the museum during the Spanish Civil War. In fact, he was the interim director at this point. So he had to take care of all the collections there. He also delivered some of them to the Prado Museum in order to try to safeguard them. And he also continued with his works with Phytodectas, with these beetles. And that's what Haldane, the scientific that wrote this short text, tells there, and how well they kept going in spite of the air raids and all the situation. And after this, when the war was lost and Franco's dictatorship began, my great-grandfather was politically purged, so he continued working, but he was not paid, and for a while, for several years, he lost his positions and things like that. And so it was like a interrupted career, and then his figure was not remembered, or not so well remembered as it should. So this kind of this exhibition happening in the museum is a bit like well, trying to compensate that for a little bit. So that's why I also see this exhibition as this healing, and not only for the family as a whole, but especially for for example, for my mother. And well, my grandfather died several years ago, but he also tried to recover the figure of his father through his life. So, well, turning to this idea of insects as family, there's also, as I said before, it's difficult for me to try to think about this to critically engage about this, because it's so personal, and well, it's part of my life and my family history. But there is this connections I see, well, as I mentioned, well, these insects, like being part of the family and being this sort of family portraits, and also this connection between, well, in the exhibition, in a way I am becoming the exhibit, because they are going to have their this genealogical tree of the family, and we are going to be there, and this is very strange. And also they are going to have also, as a parallelism, these genealogies of Phytodectas, and that you were able to see in the article. So there are all these kind of connections there, and it's very strange in general, no? To be in this situation, and that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about it, in the sense that, well, maybe to hoping that it will help me to think about it, and try to distance myself from it, because, as I say, it's not so easy. And well, regarding this entomological, well, also another thing about the family and about the healing is that because of the Spanish Civil War, the family got split. So part of the family remained here, and part of the family went abroad. So they are now in United States and United Kingdom and other countries, and that's also, well, it's the way that it marked my family. And well, turning again to this other entomological bit of the family, to the Phytodectas, they also have like a life story. In fact, well, they were like in my grandfather's house, as far as I remember, and now they are here in the family home. And it's not clear where they come from, but researching for this exhibition, I have come to the conclusion that maybe where they were made for the 1932 International Congress of Genetics that took place in Cornell in 1932. And so they did, if you think about it, is this thing about the life of the objects, in the sense that these went there by ship, and they were there in New York, and they came back, and then at some point it ended in the family, and then they are here, and now they are going to be a little bit like the stars of the exhibition, so they will be taken away in a way back home to the museum. And it's going to be very strange again, because there will be these blanks in the wall. So yeah. As I don't know if I'm going and making connections with the keynote and the keynotes, both the keynotes and Constellation and Archipelagos. I don't know if I'm doing any one of those myself, but I don't have it figured out as it is obvious. But yeah, I wanted to try to present it and deliver these clusters of things and thoughts I have about all this. And another of the words that keeps coming to my mind is, and related to curation, is this about selection and collection. And as I mentioned, this has to do a lot with my great-grandfather again, because he was in charge, especially during the Spanish Civil War, of the collections in the museum, El Museo de Ciencias Naturales, and he had to preserve them, and also he had to collect insects for his research. And the funny thing is, he was like a collector, but not only in a scientific way, but in every way. And he was known to go to the Rastro here in Madrid and bought antiques. Some of the antiques are here also. And that's something that runs in the family, because we got them. We are like that. And I also wanted, I guess maybe I took the show and tell too far away or too seriously, but I'm going to show you some things. And this is, for instance, this box that was there is from my great-grandfather again. I don't know how to show the contents without spilling them, maybe adjusting this. So I don't know if you see the inside the box. Well, you see bits and pieces, ceramics, fossils, minerals. And this is like a sort of a miscellaneous collection that was started by my great-grandfather, and then the rest of the family added, we kept adding as children things to it, like things that we found outside, and we put them in the box. And so it's like an ongoing collection. And this may also be in the exhibition, so because it was discussed at some point, but I don't really know, because it's a little bit chaotic at the time. And we were having also discussion these mornings with two of the institutions that are involved in some way. So it's, at the moment, everything is a little bit chaos. But yeah, but it's a good thing that the exhibition is happening. And talking again, continuing with the thing about selection and collection. I would like to, because I have the feeling right now that the thing I'm doing is like collecting my great-grandfather, like because I'm researching about him and trying to find all the bits and pieces. And there are, he's very present in this house, because there are many things that belong to him. But also, we have been finding books that he wrote or he translated, buying them, or trying to find in archives more things. And I wanted to show some of the things. So I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, I'm not able to share at the moment.
There you go. I've enabled it.
Okay, thank you. So yeah. So yes, so you see a little bit. Well, these are a lot of letters and things that are in the museum that I have. well, not now, this was a few years back, but all the things and letters that he wrote, letters he received that are in the museum and in the archive also, that is in the Residencia de Estudiantes. So there are many, many things and things I have also recovered from archives. And one other thing that I have done is to, well, this is what I mentioned, the article that was in the materials. So here you have also these genealogies, well, the Phytodactyls, the prints of the Phytodactyls themselves, but you have also these genealogies with the genes and all that. And yeah, maybe just this just a curious thing, because in the article it was mentioned also one of these beetles having two different patterns at the same time, like a genetic oddity maybe. And well, I found this among his papers, just a curious thing. One of the things I have been doing is like trying to trace his photographs and images in the Congress he attended, something like that. So you have these pictures of the congresses, the International Congress of Genetics, and well, mostly white male scientists, not exclusively, but mostly that. And then tracing him in these pictures, well, here he is. This is him. And well, funny enough, this picture is called International Congress of Genetics with Dog. I haven't looked into the story of that, but that would be a funny thing to look at, but I still haven't figured this out. But this is the dog. And then in the proceedings of the International Congress of Sixth International Congress of Genetics, the one that took place in New York, well, then you find his participation in this kind of congresses. And well, this is the number of his number in the picture and the picture. And I wanted to show this because this is the bit where I found that these are probably the exhibits, the Phytodactyl beetles that were exhibited there. Well, I'm not sure, but these ones were made by this artist, Serapio Martinez. Maybe there was a little bit of confusion there because the artist delivered, but that made that was Serapio Martinez, and it's the same artist of these watercolors in my bag. So maybe these are the ones that travel there and then go back, but I'm not really sure. And this was an exhibit that was there in the Congress, and you have the different patterns and the explanation. And yeah, other congresses like this one, more than a decade later, that took place in Stockholm. Yeah, I think, and this is him again, but you can see, of course, him aging in these pictures. And I also, this thing about finding him, which is a little bit like a game. And I also find a film that was made in this Congress, and he's featured there, but very briefly in an excursion they made in a boat. So this is the bit in which he appears. And yeah, 10 years later, he was also in Montreal. And he's here, but he is much more older looking here. You have him here. So it's this thing about, yeah, this feeling about collecting my great-grandfather and trying to find bits and pieces on him, and not to really, well, I provide them to the curator, and some of them will maybe be featured in the exhibition, but I don't really do what to do in my side with them. Well, this is a family picture. This is him with family. This is my grandmother. This is my grandfather, and this is my mother here, and the rest of the family. And then here again, you recognize things because this is sitting somewhere in the house. So yeah, things that you recognize and are very familiar. And then also about the collection. Well, in this article that I translated, you see, well, he explains also how he collects these beetles and where he does that, because it was a local collection here in the outskirts of Madrid. Well, not longer the outskirts, but it was the outskirts at that moment, in the retamas, which are these plant, these bushes. And I went there last weekend in order to see how it was now. And I took these pictures. And well, there are some retamas, but mostly this has been transformed into a more conventional park. So there's not so much wild nature there. And the one that there is more like, well, the retamas that are like in abandoned bits, because they have left there, but there are not so many retamas. And this would be where he found most of the beetles, and also where he took the retamas in order to feed them, which is not really close to the museum. So there is this epic going on with people that have looked into his life, saying he had to go every day, or he or his students, to pick the retama in order to feed the beetles. And also there was only one generation of beetles each year. So it was very difficult to work in that genetic sense with this. And there's, well, there are few retamas there, but not many. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And yes, as a final bit, I wanted to show other kinds of things, because my mother was here, like compilating bits and things also for the exhibition. So we have here all these books and things, because he was also the translator of the Origin of Species in Spain, and this is a translation that is still used. So that's another thing. And we have also like things like one of his notebooks here, and yeah, that it was written in French. And looking for things, I noticed things like, for instance, I don't know if you see that there. So it's like this silly drawing, and it's like finding traces of who my great-grandfather was. And well, you have the scientific side, but then you have all the bits and things like that drawing there, or yeah. And or also I relate maybe, because this is, for instance, his PhD. And having done one myself, then you also relate to him, because he did this. And here in this PhD, he also, he named a few species of coppepods that are still not named, that are still in use. Well, these drawings were made by him. This not the Phytolectas, but these ones, they were made by him. Yeah. And yeah, to end, I would like to end with this book, which is El Mundo de los Insectos, which is a book, a book for children and teachers, that part of a collection that was made at that time, when they were trying to educate a lot of the Spanish population with this sort of initiatives. And also there was in the museum, they also gave away collection of minerals and things to schools. And this was an effort in this sense. And it's El Mundo de los Insectos, which is the world of insects. And funny enough, this book was forbidden during the Spanish Civil War. Yeah, for a long while, it was not able, well, this was in this list of censored books that were not deemed, I don't know, patriotic and appropriate. So yeah, and it's a very conventional book on insects, and with different sections. And I would like to read the final bit of it that I translated for the occasion, because it talks about, well, in a chapter talking about collecting insects, because how to collect insects are given instructions how to collect insects, which I also read with kind of an ambivalent attitude, with not liking maybe the idea to collect insects and put them in displays with pins and that sort of things. But it ends. He ends the chapter with saying that insects can be also observed alive, and this is a very good thing, and he recommends it. But before that, I would like to read how this one of these lists in which this book appears as a censored one started, which is, and this is, this book, as I said, was considered anti-patriotic, anti-religious. And one of the most, this document says in what point, one of the most effective norms used by the revolution to infiltrate its poisonous doctrines into Spanish society has been the sectarian and anti-pedagogical school book distributed with malicious intent in recent years in the secular school of the Republic. So this was considered a very dangerous book, but well, yeah, it's difficult to understand why, but yeah. And this books ends like this, and this is what my great-grandfather wrote. I would not like to end this chapter without drawing attention to the fact that if collecting insects and forming collections with them is attractive or interesting, it is even more interesting to observe them live and to study their habits. Doing so is not as difficult as you might think. It is a matter of a lot of patience and a little sagacity. No complicated gadgets needed. An expert knowledge is not essential, since the life of insects is so varied that it is almost preferable to observe them as if one knew nothing, willing to learn everything from nature itself. I did this on a certain occasion with some little beetles, escarabajitos, he calls them, and he is referring to the Phytodectas, that live in Retama. And I have managed to breed them in captivity and even to obtain great-grandchildren, bisnietos, which I find, well, yeah, I'm his great-granddaughter, so it's from the ones I cut first. I have these insects in small glass cups, like those of wine, covered with a gauze. At the bottom of the glasses, there is a bit of earth, and during the spring and summer, I made sure that every time they eat is continually renewed. When they lay eggs, I take them to another glass that has no soil, and there I feed the little larvae with special care. And when I know that they are going to transform into nymphs, I take them to a third glass with soil in which they sink, and there they transform into nymphs. And after a few days, they come to the surface again in a state of perfect insects. My little beetles spend fall or winter buried without requiring any care. So, well, that's it. And then he includes a bit by the entomological, the French entomologist. And well, this is what I've tried to present. A bit these bits and bobs about my great-grandfather, also my difficulties about dealing with this, like as I usually try to critically engage things. And I hope you found this interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts. So whatever you have to offer or react.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I don't even know what, I don't have an immediate question. Anybody have an immediate reaction?
Well, I can't keep showing your stuff. There are many things here, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gail has a question, I see. Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm up to a question. I found the material a bit intimidating, and the drawings really beautiful. And then, you know, to kind of think about how that works within your family context is, I think, really interesting. But one kind of thing it did make me think of, because you referenced William Bateson as a person that your father was kind of referring his work on the beetles to. And I think there's a really interesting kind of connection. I've been reading a bit of Gregory Bateson's work on the double bind, which I'm kind of interested in as a kind of substitute for the concept of paradox, which is so much overused in zoo scholarship. So I'm kind of interested about how something like the double bind kind of shifts that. So Gregory Bateson being William Bateson's son, there's actually a kind of, I was just remembering it, I recently read an article on that website Aeon about William and Gregory Bateson. And there was one thing about William Bateson, he held, biology. He was completely obsessive about biology, obviously, but he held art as being higher than biology. And some of his sons wanted to go into art, and he sort of more or less banned it. And it's quite a tragic story. So, but he felt that, even though art, and he collected William Blake images, so even though art was kind of higher than science, he would say to his three sons, that's not for the likes of us. And then Gregory Bateson talks about, having to become this biologist because his other two brothers are tragically killed. But he learns, he leaves and becomes an anthropologist, as everybody probably knows. But one of the things he said was that it was in studying beetles that he developed his powers of observation. So I kind of think I'll put in the chat the link to, it's just a kind of short article by Tim Parks, who's a kind of fairly well-known writer and translator. And it's a really nice article, but it's just that line about the beetles and your great-grandfather's kind of interest in beetles, and how that kind of plays back to some of your other interests, like, how it relates to the kind of artistic value of the drawings and how we look at animals, and that whole kind of question about the value of observation itself. And then I think it's kind of interesting because that was the bit I picked up on in the work, I suppose, was this kind of concept about mutation. And mutation was, and my kind of understanding of genetics is pretty kind of probably wrong, but mutation was this kind of controversy so Bateson's father, William, ends his career very marginalised in English science, because even though he's like the guy who, finds Mendel and revives Mendel, he can't accept the modern synthesis argument because he believes there's other things that are going on. And the recent research on Bateson's ideas, William Bateson's ideas, is that he was right, that a lot of these things that were utterly rejected at the time, and reading kind of about that period, it's absolutely fascinating, and you've linked it to Haldane, but it's really brutal. Like, it's really cutthroat. You're either kind of, right or wrong, or in or out. There's some really tragic stories about scientists killing themselves. And, it's like you sort of scrape away at the surface. And so when I look at those images that you show, I'm immediately thinking, who's there and what's their relationship? So that it's very fascinating. But, the kind of one writer, and it just came into my head, and I wouldn't know where I read this, but he basically said that, Gregory Bateson's work in anthropology and in trying to, so Gregory Bateson was really important in attacking the kind of concepts about dualism in the 1960s. And there's this sort of idea that he was actually inspired by, a kind of filial duty to his father, that it was in, he ran away from his father's demands, but he also kind of comes back as this kind of filial duty to the heretical idea, I suppose, or the idea that, the kind of, straight kind of scientific view is actually profoundly destructive. So sorry to go on a bit, but that was the line that, the Beatles took me down, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't have the feeling that my great grandfather well, he was in touch with many people, and that is very interesting to see his the letters and his correspondence. But I don't feel like he was analyzing the things he did like in like away from the science, because he was like very hands-on and very observing things. But well, it doesn't. But I will think about it. Thank you. And also, I was remembering right now that I also forgot to mention that that's something that occurred to me like only a couple of days. The things about I focused so much on my great grandfather, and then I always forget about my great grandmother. So I'm usually very conscious of like gender issues and things, but in this case, being something that it's, well, I'm so immersed in, is difficult. And then I sometimes don't do the usual things that I usually do. And in this case, well, forgetting one symptom of that is forgetting about, well, my great grandmother, for instance. And it's even more striking if I consider that my name comes from her. Because well, my mother was named after her grandmother, and then I got my my mother's name, and also the name comes with a piece of again an antique that was collected by my great grandfather, because he was an atheist, which was a very dangerous thing to be during the Franco's dictatorship. But well, my great grandmother was very, very religious, and so he gave to her Immaculada Concepción, which is this religious figure of a virgin, and because of her name was Concepción, Immaculada Concepción, and then that one came to my mother because of the name, and eventually will come to me because of the name, because it's like a family heirloom or inheritance. So, but in spite of that, I kept forgetting my great grandmother. So, yeah.
Hi, can I jump in?
Yes, sir, Isa.
Sure. I just wanted to say, I mean, the presentation, because you've told me about this for a few years, you know, so it's really nice to see everything come together. And I think in the materials, you know, it's that kind of standard entomology paper, but reading for kind of traces of your grandfather, like the bit at the end, I think it's like the final paragraph where he's picking insects off the wall, you know, and this kind of enthusiasm that comes through. But then the way that you did this kind of desktop presentation just now, and you're kind of, it's your enthusiasm that builds for the subject that's really nice, you know, and there's, I think it's like, it worked really well. I mean, I think in relation to what you were saying about archipelago and constellation as well, but there's, yeah, it makes me think what the exhibition would be like. And I know you said that you're not curating it.
Yeah, the thing is the exhibition, well, I think it's going to be a very conventional one. But I'm hoping that maybe, well, collaborating into it, I may be able, but I was thinking about Mariana, which says, and the things he did in the Natural Science Museum. And it would be nice to be able to do something myself there, but I'm not in charge of the exhibition, so I don't know what I'm going to be able to do at some point. But well, it's going to be up for like six months. And so it's plenty of time there maybe to do something at some point. But I think the exhibition is going to be a very conventional one about his biography and sections about his work. And so, yeah, but I'm still, yeah. And if you have any idea to possible interventional activities going in this frame that I can propose to the museum, but that will be great also. And thank you, Aisha, and thank you. And yes, I'm glad you said about the enthusiasm, because I see kind of that kind of connection running through the family in different ways. And we have, yeah, we define ourselves as having this Diogenes syndrome of collecting things and everything. So many of the things of my great grandfather ended up here because nobody wanted them. But yeah, so, but we wanted everything, and we collect everything. And if you look at the house, it's like a little bit, it has the feel of a cabinet of curiosities of some sorts, because it's full of things. So yeah.
I mean, it makes me wonder if you know, you have this very straight museum exhibition, but then your role is more, you know, it's almost performative or something, you know, that you have you know, instead of you making an exhibition that sits alongside it, or you're contributing to the exhibition, you're the one having events or having something that's like time-based, where you talk through, because it feels like this comes alive when you're talking about it, especially, you know. So I don't know if that's useful.
Well, thank you. Well, I guess at some point, I hope at least I will be able to deliver a lecture or something, but I'm not really sure. Well, right now, and also I was mentioned that we were having discussion about this morning with my mother and well, two of the institutions that are related to my great-grandfather, because he worked all his life in Museo de Ciencias Naturales, but then all the archival materials were donated to Residencia de Estudiantes. And they have a bit of thing going on there because, yeah, the archive is one place, but the exhibition is happening when he worked, and so they are sitting alongside, but they have this strange relationship between them. And right now, the Residencia Estudiantes has programmed a lecture, like trying to, I don't know, to also say, we are here also, and you cannot take the figure of the scientists all by yourself. I don't know if this makes sense, but you have all these frictions going there also.
If I can follow, thank you again, Concepción, for this presentation. It was just really amazing to hear you narrate the story of the life of your grandfather. And it seems so familiar with the kind of archival work that I'm doing, because I'm usually, when I go to archives, there would be a collection devoted to this person, usually donated by their family, and then you kind of see a similar kind of stories unfolding. So this is really fascinating, and I wonder, like, it's not a question to you, but maybe to the whole group. What is it about entomology and collecting that is different to the kind of collecting that zoological gardens usually do, if we could think about it? Because I think, well, for genetic studies of inheritance, obviously a model organism that has a shorter lifespan is much more practical, and beetles are quite useful for that, as Drosophila, that is, I think, even mentioned in your grandfather's paper, that has this great fame in the early 20th century, obviously. Yeah, but I wonder, what is it about this, you know, kind of focus on the detail and collecting practices of entomology that, you know, lend themselves to a different kind of taxonomic thinking or scientific or epistemology, in a way, to ask certain questions about inheritance that might be a little bit different when we deal with, like, collecting animals just for display or for entertainment or anything like that, because I think there's something there that might be interesting to see. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I really liked how you made this connection between your own family and the family trees of the beetles that your grandfather drafted. And I think if I were to do an intervention, I would try to do an intervention kind of like Kafkaesque, you know, thinking from the point of the beetle. I know it might be like a bit tired, you know, becoming animal or whatever animal's perspective, but I don't know, like there's this overlap between these kinship charts and inheritance schemes and kind of like your family history, like, because he was growing families of beetles to trace how specific genes are allocated. And then, you know, you look at it from the perspective of him being your family member. So there's
and also, I mean, he says that. I mean, I have the great grandchildren, and I'm his great granddaughter. So it's like
you're literally,
yeah. So it's like, yeah, I'm here. I'm there. I'm reading you, and you're talking about your great grandchildren beetle. I'm your great grandchildren human. Well, anyway, and the thing about the beetles also that you mentioned, Drosophila, is there's also a kind of loyalty going there. And maybe it's also related to what you were saying, you were saying about the paying attention of Gail was saying about paying attention to the insects, and to have, require a special kind of detail maybe. And he started working with those beetles, and he never stopped working with them. But at some point he was in Caltech working with Drosophila, but he didn't abandon the beetles. And the thing about these beetles is you need 1 whole year in order to have a generation. So you have, if you had the great grandchildren, that was 4 years, I think. So you couldn't make, and Drosophila was picked because you could do that very, very, very quickly. But still he didn't go for Drosophila, so he remained with the beetles. And well, there's also a kind of epic there of not having heat in the laboratory, and also he mentioned the deaths of the beetles because of that. And regarding what you were mentioned about focusing on insects and why it is different, I don't know, but he also mentions, and in this book he also mentions that about collecting. He says, well, you have to consider that there are so many insects that it's not like you are going to have them all. You have to choose. That you have to pick like a specialty there. Like I'm going to go for butterflies, or I'm going to go for human insects that are related to humans, or I'm going to go to. So you have to pick your subject because it's impossible to do everything. I don't know if this number of insects has something to do in being different in order to collect, or maybe, well, they are everywhere, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, there's something to look into there, so thank you.
I think that entomologists quite often have this very narrow specialization, like, or any kind of historical figures that were entomologists that I studied were like, I am only researching this type of wasps. You know, and like that's a very common thing for them to do. So that's also interesting that you call this a loyalty towards the beetle. But I mean, it's also because of the time, right? You need so much time for all these generations to be able to see the variance and difference. So temporality plays a really important role in this, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a long tradition of authors who are also entomologists, or you know, collect butterflies and beetles and that sort of thing. So there seems to be a kind of relation, sort of a poetics of collecting and paying attention to these little details, and a certain kind of loyalty to these the various forms that you find. I mean, I think there's also, you asked what's the difference between collecting insects and collecting animals for a zoo. I mean, I think it's harder, you know, it's harder to go into your back garden and collect an animal for the zoo. And so there's a kind of this idea that you can just go out and do it, and you don't need any specialized, you know, you don't have to travel to Africa with a big horde of helpers and lots of ammunition and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think, but I'm just looking at the time, and I think we should move on to the next presentation. But thank you, Kocha, for sharing this with us. It was really really interesting, and I want to emphasize, I really liked the mode of presentation, which seemed as if it was just sort of happening spontaneously, and we were just kind of getting a glimpse of all of these items. I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you, but it was a little bit like that. I mean, because
don't tell us. I'm sure this was all carefully planned. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Okay, so we shall move on to Soojin. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but since we don't have a keynote at the end of this afternoon, I think we'll just take a break when we feel like we need to take a break. I don't think it's a bad thing if we go 10 minutes over. Soojin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hello.
I hope we could do this in enough time. I thought I had planned nothing, but I think maybe I planned too much. Firstly, what a wonderful workshop. I've been looking forward to it all year. Yeah, thank you, Carrie, for organizing, and for everyone who's participating. I wasn't able to be there for the workshops yesterday. I was there for the keynote, So if there are crossovers, which I'm sure there will be with what I bring up today, please share as much as you feel like, because I would really like to know. So we'll be looking at two contemporary artists of color today. The first is Wangechi Mutu and the second is Ibul. They both work with hybridity. Yesterday in Aisha Keshani's wonderful keynote, we briefly talked about form. In yesterday's case, it was a discussion on ethnographic form and the academic written form more broadly, as Louise Green generously brought forward, and how these forms can support or fail to support more expansive ways of thinking about cosmos, multiple worlds, multiple alams, in the movement towards decolonizing zoos and zoological representations. Because of the unique composition, the materials, the processes, and the embrace of the uncanny, particularly the fear and the erotics of the uncanny within the act of creation or birth, which is always entangled in the act of death and slaughter, contemporary art by racialized artists working in colonial modernity offers to academic discourse perhaps a more proximate form of research than traditional ethnographic or zoological research. It certainly offers new hybridities of research that create embodied interventions into matter and meaning in the nebulous categories of sex, gender, species, and race. And this comment is less a response to Aisha's approach, though it was triggered by Aisha's nourishing presentation. But I would say it's more a response to Elizabeth Pavanelli's work. Pavanelli's bringing in, for example, indigenous cosmologies into their work geontologies alongside Western thinkers for the purposes, I presume, of bringing marginalized voices into conversation, always begged for me the question of for whom is the conversation for? Will the indigenous people she brings in be reading and responding to the readers of geontologies? Does consumption of indigenous practices bring us any closer to decolonization if it comes without bodily consumption and becoming? What works by contemporary artists like Mutu and Ibul can do is meet us, the Western audience, in the contemporary moment, but knowingly where the stakes lie in terms of power when interpreting the past or future through objects and the immaterial within the white walls of the art market. Okay, I'm already talking more than I want to. So I'm not presenting any formal writing today. Instead, I would like to begin with a reading of select excerpts from the chapter Organs of War in Zakiya Iman Jackson's book, Becoming Human, Matter and Meaning in an Anti-Black World. This chapter looks at the collage works of Wangechi Mutu, which, quote, borrows freely from marine biology, zoology, and botany, but in a way that gathers critical attention and directs it towards gendered aesthetics that imply facile connections between female bodies, femininity, and nature. The book overall argues that the categories of race and species co-evolved and were never actually separated in the works of Darwin or Haeckel. After the reading, which jumps and the reading that will follow this, which jumps and skips throughout the chapter, I would like to open up the workshop to the form of an art crit, looking at it, responding instinctively and imperfectly to the sensations, thoughts, and urges that come to us when looking at Mutu's more recent work at Gladstone Gallery. Hopefully by then we will have time to look at another artist's work, Ibul, who is a South Korean artist, ideally taking on some of the insights we gained in interpreting Mutu's work from Jackson's text, but in the case of Ibul, without the aid of the text. I have some thoughts that I wrote this morning in response to Wangechi Mutu at Gladstone Gallery that I will share in the later portion, but this is unrefined, completely free thought writing that I wrote this morning. But since I'm asking you all for equally fresh responses to the artworks, perhaps this can create a more horizontal space. So let me just share my screen because I created excerpts from the very long reading that I assigned to you. Okay, one second, I have to grant. My computer's asking me to quit and reopen Zoom if I want to share my screen. Maybe this can work. Yes. Okay. Can everyone see my very messy screen? Cool. Okay, so I can begin, and then I'll just call on somebody to read, and then when you tire of reading, you could go to the next, you could call on somebody else. I've created highlights, and I should have done this when I provided the reading, but I didn't, because I know it was a really long piece of writing. I just have a hard time editing down Jackson's work because I just find it fascinating. So I'll start here. The final chapter of Becoming Human concerns the interrelation of scientific and philosophical discourses of race and species, as well as continues the previous chapter's investigation of mutation, speculating on both its potentiality, pernicious, and vitalizing force by examining figurations of the Black female body in genetics, evolutionary discourse, and works by Audre Lorde and Wangechi Mutu. I argue that Mutu's alternating aesthetic strategies of exposure, allegory, and mutation articulate the potentiality for the inoperability of biopolitical calculations of personhood and the forestallment of anti-Black economies of life. In other words, her aesthetic strategies reveal a potential with neither guarantee nor a manifest horizon of possibility, but a potential nonetheless, for mutation beyond a mode of thought and representation that continually adheres to predefined rules and narratives that legitimate anti-Black ordering and premature death. It would appear that speculation regarding the immateriality of genetic race has overshadowed the more fundamental and materially pertinent question of how racialized environments are embodied. Or as Clarence Gravely succinctly notes, the common assertion that race is not biology may be correct in spirit, but it is too crude and imprecise to be effective. It does not adequately challenge the reductionism and genetic determinism of biomedical science or popular culture, and blinds us to the biological consequences of race and racism as sociocultural phenomena. In other words, the controversy surrounding the reality of genetic race has forestalled a fuller recognition of the biopsychological consequences and somatic materialities of anti-Black racism. An exclusive focus on the domain of DNA undercuts what could be a fuller consideration of both the agentic capaciousness of somatic processes and the life and death stakes of that capacity. Sylvia Wynter would argue that this overinvestment in DNA is a symptom of biocentrism. Wynter argues that a culturally imposed symbolic belief system serves as the internalized sanction system that motivates behavior, biochemically affirming or negating in dynamic relation to societal norms and values prior to any reflective process. A species-specific opioid reward and punishment system serves to induce its appropriate behaviors through the mediation of each person's subjective experience of what feels good and what feels bad to and for each person. If the organismic body delimits the human species, then the body is itself culturally determined through the mediation of the socialized sense of self, as well as through the social situation in which this self is placed. The transformation of subjective experience is culturally and thereby socio-situationally determined with these determinations, in turn serving to activate their physicalist correlates. Thus, subjectively experienced visceral processes take place such that their functioning cannot be explained in terms of only the natural sciences, of only physical laws. Alex Wahili rightly distinguishes Wynter's sociogeny from sociobiology, cautioning, Wynter does not focus on the origins and adaptive evolution of race itself, but rather on how sociogenic principles are anchored in the human neurochemical system, thus counteracting sociobiological explanations of race, which retrospectively project racial categories onto an evolutionary screen. Can I call on Concha? Just maybe from where, in contrast.
Yeah, In contrast to the biocentric view of the species, Winter argues, we can experience ourselves as human only through the mediation of the processes of socialization expected by the invented technique or cultural technology to which we give the name culture, sociogenic, emphasis added. Winter once stated, for me, Black studies is about enabling the exit from the substitute religion, evolution, a substitute religion which represses the fact that once language has co-evolved with the brain, the process of evolution was followed by the event of human auto-institution, of autopoiesis. In other words, the technology that is culture, Winter argues, is evolutionarily significant such that with the emergence of semantic technologies, humans gained a emergence of semantic technologies, humans gained a technology that develops the power to direct the specific terms of the nervous system order or perception and categorization. Harness its stripes to its now culturally defined sociogenetic own, and even override the genetic instinctual sense of self where necessary, activating by their semantic reprogramming the opioid system, reward and punishment, in culture-specific terms as if it were instinct. Thus, semiosis plays a determinant role in the adaptive processes of both culture and biology, meaning and biochemical affect. Winter argues that racism deploys coercive semantic technologies and systematically impose roles that reify bodies into types or prescriptive categories. And these types and prescriptive categories in turn trigger affects, sensations, and behaviors reflexly, activated by pervasive association that predefine and assign responsibility to those made representative of a type, sociogenic. Well, I keep reading, or
It's up to you.
well, in this chapter, thinking with Winter's argument that this choreography has evolutionary significance and against a biocentric conception of the species, I want to push her theory of sociogeny beyond an exclusive focus on the nervous system and problematize the question of the auto-poiesis by transcribing the embodied self as a kind of open work produced by a lattice of agencies rather than primarily self-author closed system. And now I have Matthew behind under me.
You're going to have to remind me where to read from. Is it departing from?
Yes, that's right.
Departing from an exclusive focus on structure, whether it be that of the double helix or scaled up to the symbolic order, I argue that the matter of Black female sexuality and reproduction are better understood via a framework of emergence and within the context of iterative, interactive, multi-scalar systems, biological, psychological, environmental, and cultural. When Gichi Mutu's histology of the different classes of uterine tumours crucially reveals the stakes of this interactivity as it pertains to the semiomaterial history of the Black female body, reproductive function and sexuality as opposable limit and linchpin of the human species in scientific taxonomies and medical science. Mutu's art provides insightful commentary on systematicity in general, but for our purposes, it is notable for its constructive reorientation of the theorization of race via a reflexive methodological practice of collage, one that reframes the spectatorial encounter from that of a determinate Kantian linear teleological drama of subjects and objects to that of interactive processes and indeterminate feedback loops. Thus, this is not a study of a reified object, but of an interactional field that includes material objects but is not limited to them. Moreover, I assume diverse immaterial agencies and affectivity without pretending to exhaust causality. Who's next?
Matthew, will you call on someone?
The next person in my list is Kari.
Okay. While Mutu's histology of the different classes of uterine tumors presents an art object for interpretation, the nature of that object may perhaps surprise because, as I will demonstrate, the object is tripled, interactional, and chiasmatic, material and immaterial interactant. In other words, the material object is offered for interpretation, but so is the process of interpretation itself. Hence, the art object is best conceived neither solely in its material existence nor in the actualization of symbolic interpretation, but rather in the chiasmatic and seemingly infinite interactive meeting of matter and systems of representation in the semio-affective field of visuality. Soojin, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I said maybe we could stop here for now. And Kari, would you please share the Dropbox on your screen for the images of Wangechi Mutu, which is on page 142. I just have notes on my browser as well, so I don't think I could share simultaneously.
Just a sec. Which is on page what, sorry?
142.
Okay, just a second. Okay, I may not be able to do this because I don't think I've ever shared my screen on Zoom before. So you may have to get somebody else to do it.
I can do it. I've got it right here.
Okay, that would be great.
Thank you. And Aisha, feel free to scroll through it as you see fit. So some things I want to carry over from not just the excerpts, but I'm hoping that all of you or some of you have read more of the larger excerpt from this chapter. But some things I want to carry over are the interactive processes to go beyond the linearity of history, the erotics and the sensual in the hybrid object. For example, the erotics between the monstrous and the feminine that birthed the works of Mutu and Ibul. Another area I would like to hear your thoughts on is the space of the art museum in relation to the zoo or natural history museum. So I can start with some remarks on the work of Wangechi Mutu's practice, and then I'll open up to your instinctual imperfect responses. That would be great. So I was able to glean a bit more about Mutu's work from this 2021 studio visit video, which I'll put in the chat here, and you could all watch it another time if you want. So Mutu states that she doesn't go out of her way to make something grotesque. She likes to begin the evolution of her characters from something quite familiar, but at the same time obscene, like encountering a dirty lake. So is it grotesque, she asks, or is it magnificent, or is it just absolutely sad? She freely changes the character from something that we understand to something that makes absolutely no sense. Her words. She also states that she starts from fear. Although much of her work includes opening the body up, for example, in the collage works that were in the Jackson text, she is actually afraid of what material reality of organs, and tissues and blood. She states, it's my way of asking why, when flesh is all we have, what is it that keeps us from dealing with it as a real thing? We don't want to see our food before it gets to the table. In regard to her hybrids, she says that bringing animal and human together in form is as old as the human mind. For these sculptures at Gladstone Gallery in New York, she states she started from the qualities of animals, in this case, the stingray, and in other cases below the crocodile, that are admired by humans. Their speed, their strength, The mythical figures cast in bronze here include those qualities, and in their presence, I am aroused, in awe, I feel pleasantly dominated. There is an element of the grotesque that brings me to the floor and I feel a squeamish excitement. This process of starting from admiral attributes of the animal made me think of similar processes of indigenous consumption rituals. For example, dog consumption rituals in Korea. Dogs are eaten for virility, for vital force, to balance one's chi. Why is it that we can allow ourselves to consume this practice of becoming as an art object and be sensually pleased, perhaps aroused, yet a more literal embodiment produces feelings of disgust? What lies within experiencing a fantastical, seductive object in a sanitized, which perhaps signals to us safe, space that can then bring us, in turn, closer back to the filth of consumption in colonial modernity? Upon situating clearly this work's stakes, and as well as the viewer's stakes in the violent history that co-birthed the ongoing conflation of race and species, can we begin to acknowledge the erotics of seeing a shiny, black, magnificent object and what these inherited sensual codes have done to our view and treatment of Blackened feminine bodies? Where does the bleeding between admiration and disgust splatter? Is this zone a place where Blackened bodies of Black and perhaps Asian diasporas can gather to eat as they want? Okay, so that was really just unrefined writing that I did this morning, and I would love to hear your thoughts as if we are in the gallery space together experiencing this.
I have a question about how one encounters these figures in the gallery. Can you hear me okay? Are we largely confronting them face on as we walk through, or are we following them through? Or possibly a mixture?
What do you mean by following through?
I'm wondering about how much we're directed through these different rooms, if we, or so some of these photos, we see the figures from the back first, we see their, what looked to me often like tails. And I could see this as sort of a procession, or as something either much more random or much more, I'm not going to find the right word right now. I guess my question is about how much one is able to encounter these figures in an entirely random order, or how much one is building through each of the rooms at once.
Yes, that's a really interesting insight. Thank you. I don't know. I can't speak for the curator, and I haven't seen this work in person. But I think what you're saying in terms of how we are led through, and if it's from the back or from the front or from the side and from what distance, is really important in the experience that we'll have when taking in this work in terms of our relation to it.
Thank you. They're really incredible figures.
They're not mine.
I'm struck by the bronze materiality, which I find terribly attractive. And I kind of think that it's an interesting kind of tension to use such a monumental material, I guess, in relation to the text as well, the kind of idea of almost a kind of a flow or non-materiality, and a kind of question about, you know, that kind of interesting kind of tension, I guess, between something which looks very much like it will endure in the same kind of fixed image, and something which looks also like that it's taken at a moment in time, or like a kind of an action we'll never know what it is. It's like it's very mysterious in that kind of sense, not just in the oddness of the kind of, you know, the unknown creature, the hybrid creature that we've never encountered before, I guess. And I guess probably on that front, I'd say I'm so used to coming across strange creatures in art galleries that the hybrid itself doesn't strike me in that sense. And, you know, things, Patricia Piccinini's work's very popular in Australia, and it deals with a kind of similar set of concerns. But I think that the tension between the figures and the materiality and the kind of the way that kind of brings about still this kind of question of story, what story is unfolding. I don't know, that's kind of the sorts of things that it brings up for me. And yeah, these are mysterious.
Oh, Joanna?
Yeah, as you have asked for our unfiltered and kind of unacademic comments, I have some thoughts that might be really German. Porsche sponsors crocodiles in German zoos. I don't know whether anybody of you has seen that, but for example, when you go to Stuttgart, there is a sign in front of the crocodiles and it says, these are sponsored by Porsche and we give them a better life and all of that. And as in my dissertation thesis, I have dealt quite a bit with capitalism and neoliberalism. And there's not a good English translation for that word, but maybe someone of you can help me. It's the word Raubtierkapitalismus. You would translate it with like dog eat dog capitalism, maybe in English. Predator.
Like predator capitalism, I would say.
Yeah, but Raubtier is kind of better in this context. But since this exhibition is in New York, and I think New York is like the center of, you know, capitalism, and especially US American capitalism, it kind of, maybe we can see, like when we see the crocodile as, you know, kind of a symbol for capitalism, and then the promise of capitalism is that everybody can make it if you just, you know, show enough effort. Like you can do it yourself and you can win, and if you lose in that system, it's your own fault. You know, that is kind of the narration of capitalism. And of course, as we all know, there are people who do not succeed in this system, and it's not because they do not show enough effort, it's because they are marginalized in some way, because they are female or they are Black or, you know, disabled or whatever. They are like people who do not succeed. And, you know, if I look at these pictures from this kind of perspective, it kind of, you know, what comes to my mind is like trying to tame capitalism, trying to show people who do not take advantage in that system, especially Blacks, trying to tame this white male system, like in the middle of New York, which is the center of capitalism. I don't know, it's just some associations that came to my mind because, yeah, I was reminded of this word Raubtierkapitalismus, and then, you know, because of the Porsche signs that always stand in front of the crocodile cages in German zoos.
Thank you so much. Can you write the German word in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you. I think you are also onto something in terms of the materials that are being used for this particular work, because I think Mutu generally likes to work with softer elements that can erode faster, like dirt or plants. And so maybe there, and I've noticed that she tends to use bronze or steel when it's much more public facing in the way that it, like for example, in New York in this white gallery, or I think there was another work where she was in front of, I want to say, a National History Museum, but you know, in terms of like approaching that grand of a public scale, I feel like she does tend to use more, robust materials. Yes, and I think there's a really interesting kind of conversation that was going on about predator, about the word that could also mean, did you say it could also mean dark as well as predator? I think those bleeding of the two terms says a lot. And I will look into it more. Does anyone else have thoughts?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that, and I think it's related to the fleshy dimension that you were mentioning in your writing, that I feel both attracted and repelled by the figure. And in a way, I really like the patterns, but the way they are built and making the volumes then has this fleshy kind of tactile sensation, and yeah, to them that it's like they were inside out. So and this is something that, as you were saying, we try to, well, we have this rejection towards this kind of things and fleshy sensations. So that I think that that's what also repels me a bit about the figures. So if I focus on the detail, all these wavy lines and all that, it's like very aesthetically pleasing, I would say. But then if the figure has this fleshy dimension that I find a little bit repelling, maybe.
Yes, I agree. It's something about like the repetitive gills and lines that are fluid yet crystallized, and the kind of like spherical repetition of egg-like patterns. Yeah, I'm one of those people that like I have a huge phobia of like concentric like spheres and circles. So yeah, it makes me feel quite nauseous too, but at the same time, attracted to it. So I'm glad that, Concha, you also feel similarly. I'm not alone here. Lynn has put a comment here. She says, listening to this amid chaotic builders, etc. So hopefully I haven't missed a key reference. But is it remotely possible Mutu was aware of Coringa, a 1930s woman of color who might be French, who performed with a crocodile? Marissa Karneski is researching Coringa at the moment, and here's another link. Thank you, Lynn. I'll look into that. And Mia says that predator capitalism seems inherent in the notion of primitive accumulation from your description, or closely akin linked to it. Interesting the suggestiveness of animal ethnicity, race in these terms. Yeah. And Matthew says, there are many differences as well, but the tactility of the sculptures reminds me of some of Abdul Rahman Abdullah's work. I gave a floor talk titled Why Carve Animals in Response to this exhibition. Everything is True earlier this year. Thank you, Matthew.
So this isn't about the figures. Well, I mean, I would like us to say something about the mysterious eggs in the basket, because it's not entirely clear to me also from the description of the work, the official description, which of the two it belongs to. But before we do that, I keep thinking about the gallery space itself, and especially this kind of rising damp that that you have coming up. Right. I mean, I'd never been to this gallery before, but I assume that the walls don't always look like this, and that the way that they're painted or not is part of the installation. But I'm not. I don't know. Right? There's something that somebody mentioned the white box of the art world, and this way, and here it seems to be, I don't know, not quite as white as it, not as pure, as clean, as sort of sterile as it usually is, or pretends to be.
I didn't even notice that, but you're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely purposeful. And as someone who's had to live in some questionable housing with mold,
Sorry.
I will say that there's something, you know, very ghostly about mold, about this kind of like multiplying presence that comes through what's meant to be structural frames of your home. And I think there's lots of research also that certain kinds of mold can also affect your brain, and that also has lots of ghostly correlations. Yeah, so I think there is definitely a bringing in of other worlds, especially the dead, that comes into this particular work, in both conversations about species and race and gender. Mariana?
Yeah, thank you for sharing those again. This is really fascinating. I wonder if you think of this work as Afrofuturism, or this is too simple of categorization of kind of the intervention that the artist is making. But definitely the first Mama Ray sculpture reminded me of this work by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, Undrowned, on Black feminist lessons from marine mammals. And it's very much focused on breathing and the rite of passage and all of that. And I think that somehow, as somebody mentioned that even in this sculpture that is visible now, Concepción, you said that there's these gills and these weird structures. I think that even though the material chosen is this heavy bronze, there's something breathing, and also the dampness and the water that is implied, that this kind of circulation of air and the breath are important parts of those works in some ways. Yeah, so that's the things I was thinking about when looking at them.
Cool, yeah, thank you so much. I love that. And yes, I do think this is Afrofuturism. And I haven't read Undrowned yet, but I've been recommended by Lynn, and I will read it next. But I think there's a lot of connection, right, to the slave ship and the connection to sea animals, sea gods, and sea spirits, that I'm not sure if it's addressed in Undrowned, but I think it's addressed in a lot of other Black literature. Anastasia?
Oh, I actually think Christina was up before me.
Okay, Christina.
For me, because it's just, as Mariana says, it reminds me so much of something fluid and slippery and the water. Well, and even as Kari said, with this painted walls of the gallery, which looks like as if they were wet as well. And I was wondering about the material. So if these sculptures are made from plaster, so before they went into the bronze afterwards, so probably they were wet before. And it also reminds me a bit, this is more associative, to these Baroque bronze reptile plastics. So when you put reptiles into a kind of bronze metal, so hot and fluid metal, and you can, yeah, of course you kill the animal, but afterwards you have a kind of reptile, maybe not with crocodiles, but with smaller animals. And you have an imprint, a bronze imprint of the reptile. And there are several bronze, which are more naturalistic, of course, than these are, but they have a kind of really fascination for this structure, for the ornament. And this is a kind of more associative thing. But so the question was the actual material, the fluidity. So if maybe you know if they are made from plaster or clay, or what's the material, because actually I share this perception that they look so wet and alive, and maybe it's related to the original material.
Yes, I'm not, thank you, Christina. That's really fascinating. I'm not exactly sure, but I know that she uses a lot of, like, for example, flowers or leaves that she casts in plaster in her later works. So perhaps, but either way, your description of the reptile and the Baroque casts being made is like an incredible visceral experience, I think, to cast something that was just alive in plaster, and to to crystallize it in form afterwards. And it makes you think of like what kind of maybe immaterial movement that created that wetness. Anyway, Anastasia, thank you.
Oh yeah, yes, thank you. So I have kind of burgeoning thoughts here that I'm going to try to articulate. So when looking at this, I was reminded of Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark, and the way that she claims that blackness defines whiteness, sort of like the black frame defining the image within. And I'm struck by the ways in which here the black body is at the center. So in some ways, like, it reverses that binary, but it doesn't, but by putting it at the center rather than the margins, it doesn't ossify it or somehow make it static. It's at the center, and yet it's always moving. So I'm really interested in the way that these photos, so on the one hand, there's one in which the crocodile is almost literally framed by the white walls, but at the same time, in all the other images, which in some ways kind of mimic, I guess, the museum goer's experience of walking around and experiencing that through motion, that the focal perspective is also moving, creating, I think, that kind of fluidity that's not only within the organic lines of the statuary itself, but also, you know, it's just never quite like pinning it down, like it's always sort of shifting, it's always in motion. So I don't know if you mentioned this and I missed it, but yeah, that's the photo that I was thinking of, this framing, and yet it's always kind of evading being confined. So I was wondering, are these photos your own, or were they featured as part of the exhibit? Because there seems to be kind of a design in the focal point, always moving and always in flux.
They are not my photos, they're the galleries. And that's a beautiful observation. Maybe it's also a good way to lead really quickly to Ebel's work, and we could just close off there about kind of bleeding out, evading framing. Oh, you might have to go all the way down. But basically, I don't know if all of you have had a chance to see it, but Ebel's work was, it was a bag of, there were multiple bags of fish that I think were held in formaldehyde and also adorned with beads. And I know that it was exhibited once in 1993, and then again recently it was I think the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1997, and then it was invited to be in another gallery in London, I think last year, but I think the one, when it showed in 1997, I think the show had to be canceled because they had so many complaints about the smell. And then in the gallery in London, something happened and a bag of fish like exploded and lit into like flames. Yeah. which again, I think has a very ghostly presence that urged that to come on, but also maybe just completely chemical. And yeah, I just really like this idea of something that's meant to be so like beautiful and ornamented, but the bodily realities of it is that it creates smell, and a smell that is really unpleasant for people in the West. And I think that maybe it's a good way to tie back together with what I was saying about, and I may not be able to articulate it very clearly, but kind of this, our, maybe I could even say like mimetic ability or like mimetic visual field where we're met, where we can consume objects very pleasurably, but the kind of bodily realities are deferred. But the like potential of art to be able to kind of signal that deferral and bring it into the present moment is, I think, what's very powerful. But I don't know if anyone has any thoughts here just before we close off about majestic splendor.
I mean, just spontaneously, it occurs to me that this is the sort of the anti Damien Hirst shark and formaldehyde, which doesn't smell, and in general, the fact that it exceeds its boundaries in a way that is extremely that forces galleries then to remove it either because of complaints or because it's simply too overpowering and people can't deal with it. I don't know. It has if you compare that to a lot of other art that uses animals that in a way that is supposed to be transgressive or confronting, but is actually very easy just to consume visually and in a comfortable kind of way. I think that this it's a very interesting intervention. I didn't know about this work.
And I think there's further meanings to this, but I don't think we have time to go into it. But Mia?
Yeah, following from that, I think one way to maybe articulate the difference between Ypres and Damien Hirst is that Hirst uses matter from animals in order to aestheticize or make more beautiful the work of art, right? There's not I'm also thinking of the flies that he uses as a mosaic on these more abstract shapes or images that he creates. And then in this case, it's like the ornamentation is placed onto this organic matter that in the end, the organic matter takes over. So it's kind of it's a different process where the natural deterioration processes of the fish actually gets to be the thing that wins out or become the ultimate point of the work. And in that case too, I mean, I love the collages that Mutu made that you presented. But there is something also slightly disturbing to me about the sculptures, I guess, in contrast also to this image of the fish and majestic splendor, in that there's something super heroic, right, also about these sculptures, and especially in the sense that what we think of as being like the human face is the thing that's always at the highest point. It's upright, like the ray also, when the ray moves upright, you see this human face. And similarly, the figure on the crocodile too. So this large bronze object in the center of a white room, invoking all this, all the connotations of mythology, of heroism. There's also something about that kind of, I can see the sort of radical intervention that it's making, but at the same time, something about that also disturbs me, and maybe that's part of the power of that work too. But it's and very much in contrast to majestic splendor, where the material, the objects still get to kind of surpass or go beyond maybe what the artist had formed and placed in the exhibition space.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your feedback and your thoughts. How?
Yeah, I had yet another thought on sort of the Damien Hirst shark, because or at least sort of the gravel on which the fish is lying, sort of it reminds me of sort of like a goldfish bowl, which also sort of puts it in sort of a domestic setting in a weird sense. So it sort of disrupts this idea of the Shark Tank, sort of as opposed to this, sort of slowly deteriorating exuberance in a sort of weirdly, like it's almost as if someone just got it out of the pet shop in a sense, sort of, I don't know, it was just another association I had, but it's, I don't know, it's very interesting. Thank you for sharing this. It's, but yeah, it's a weird sort of disrupting on many levels. It's, yeah.
Yes, and thank you, Pao. And I realize I didn't spend any time talking about the artist, but I don't know if I'm like more critical, because maybe that's not the right direction to go. But basically, the interviews that are available from the artist are much more recent, and I don't resonate as much with her contemporary work. More so from like the 90s and late 80s are the work that I resonate with. Thank you all so much for all these really, really great thoughts. I'm quite surprised and happy. And there's a lot of great comments also in the comment section. That people can read through and please download, I guess. Yes, the book is really great, and I saw Zakiya Jackson in a workshop last week, and their next book also sounds really fascinating. It's about how AI software has the hardest time recognizing Black women and trans people. And yeah, so that her whole book will be about that. Okay, thank you everyone. I know we're going over time now.
Yeah, thank you, Soojin, for bringing this material. I think this was a really, really excellent session. Thank you to both of you and to everyone for participating. Aisha, I think we're still seeing your screen. Oh, not anymore. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Aisha, very much for facilitating so well.
And if we take a 9-minute break now, then we will only be 15 minutes behind schedule. And so I think that's what I would propose. So let's reconvene at 12:30 for the final session. Thank you.